Former Deputy Assistant Attorney General Tom Dupree on what he makes of all of this. Tom, always good to have you, my friend. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Neil.
One thing that struck me as interesting, and this is coming from Bill Barr, I'm kind of paraphrasing, I was taking notes earlier while he was speaking, that he, referring to Mueller, couldn't decide about obstruction, so essentially Bill Barr did by saying there wasn't enough there to go after the president and not enough to exonerate the president. What did he get wrong? It sounds like that is exactly what the report kind of concluded.
That's right. And I think in that respect, it's very hard to find fault in what the Attorney General initially reported as far as Mueller's conclusions. It seems like the area of disagreement here, Neil, between Barr and the special counsel is that the special counsel wanted the Attorney General to provide more underlying context of why Mueller reached the decisions that he did. Barr testified today that his focus was on delivering the bottom line verdict of the Mueller report to the American people, to get the news out of the bottom line conclusion in an efficient fashion. It sounds like what Bob Mueller wanted was maybe a little more detail, an explanation as to what led Mueller to reach the verdicts that he did.
All right, so that would have necessitated a delay in getting the report out to provide more of that context. Maybe Mueller would have been okay with that. What's your sense?
Well, see, that's the thing. I think if we turn the clock back to a few weeks ago when everyone was so eager to figure out what Mueller concluded, we knew the report came in. We didn't know what he said. You remember it was over a weekend. We were all watching on TVs trying to find out what did Mueller find, what didn't he find. And so it's out of that context that I think the Attorney General basically spent the entire weekend in his office going through the report so as to be able to provide a succinct bottom line description of what Mueller found. Of course, the Attorney General knew that within a matter of days or weeks, the report as a whole, except for the redacted portions, the report as a whole would become public. So I don't think there really would have been a motive on the part of the Attorney General to lie or dissemble, knowing that this whole thing was going to become a public document in a matter of days.
So do you believe the Attorney General when he says what Mueller's problem was the way the press, portrayed those findings without that context, and that bugged him?
I suspect that is what, in fact, was bothering Bob Mueller. We know that as soon as the report came out and Barr summarized the report, that there was a lot of press basically saying total vindication on the collusion part. Mueller didn't reach a conclusion on the obstruction part, but Barr reached the conclusion that there was no obstruction. And I think what Mueller wanted was a little more nuance into why Mueller didn't find obstruction. And I think from Mueller's perspective, Barr was suggesting that Mueller was basically agnostic on this issue when, as we know from the report, Mueller offered some reasons as to his ultimate decision not to reach a conclusion on that piece of the investigation. You talk about being agnostic about it. I got the impression, you're the expert, but as you know, I read a prompter, so I think I qualify. Anyway, Mueller couldn't decide on that issue, right? So that seemed to surprise Barr and, by extension, the outgoing Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein, that he hadn't reached a formal conclusion when I guess both of these gentlemen thought he would. So they took the liberty to put a bow on it, even when they didn't definitively conclude one way or the other, which was the gist of Mueller's finding. Right. And I think from the Attorney General's perspective, the Department of Justice is tasked with making these decisions, whether to prosecute or not to prosecute.
But why did he do it that way? I know it's a dumb question, but Mueller had to have known that the whole world was watching for some sort of a definitive, statement here, and he didn't provide it, leaving it open-ended. And maybe, to your point earlier, I know you've told me about that he would leave it in Congress's hands and then see what they do, but to me, it sounds like turning from your duty here.
Well, and here's the thing. I think there are two things that were animating Bob Mueller. I think number one was this point about you can't indict a sitting president under long-standing Justice Department guidance. That's the reason, a reason that he gave in the report.
I assume that is
absolutely.
The case.
That's okay. I mean, it goes back decades. It's well settled. DOJ guidance. The Department of Justice respects that decision. So I think that was a piece of it. I suspect there also was a piece of whether Bob Mueller himself thought that the evidence would be sufficient to prove obstruction or not. Here, I think it's a little ambiguous. Certainly, he never came out and said, but for that opinion, I would have charged obstruction. On the other hand, he did have that sentence where he said if we could have exonerated the president, we would have. That was a very unusual sentence for someone like Bob Mueller to put in the report, and I suspect we will learn more about why he included that sentence in the report if and when Bob Mueller testifies before Congress.
But you're a very good lawyer as well. Do you see, having read the report yourself, and get a sense that these instances that Democrats were seizing on today about the president advising his counsel to go ahead and try to get Mueller fired, the president denies that, by the way, that such actions, and there were several others, are acts of obstruction?
Yeah, I guess my take on that, Neil, is several points. Number one is I did not like a lot of what I read in the report. I was disappointed to see what was going on behind the scenes. At the same time,
what do you mean? You didn't like the president's behavior, or
Right.
Okay,
I didn't like seeing what he was doing behind the scenes. At the same time, I respect the decision of the Attorney General to look at it and make the determination as to whether there was sufficient evidence of criminal motive in what the president was doing. The Attorney General looked at that. He reached a conclusion that there wasn't sufficient motive. No matter what you think of the conduct and whether the president should have done it or shouldn't have done it, whether it crossed the bar to be able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that there was criminal activity here, that's what the Attorney General ultimately concluded.
Because I read the report not nearly with the expertise that you have, and I've read the initial conclusions or bullet points that Barr made, and I don't think he was off on those bullet points. That was my read of it, and I have no axe to grind with either side here. Your thoughts?
I think Barr gave an accurate summary of what Bob Mueller found. To be sure, he could have written a 20-page document, but he didn't have the time to do that, right? He had to get that out fast.
Well,
he wasn't looking to replicate the full report.
Right?
So, Barr basically wanted to get Mueller's bottom line conclusion into the hands of the American people as soon as he could. That's what he said he was going to do. That's what he did. Could he have said more? Of course he could, but he didn't have to, especially because he knew the report was going to be coming out in a matter of days.
All right. Thank you, my friend, very, very much. Tom Dupree, the former Deputy Assistant Attorney General, and very patient with idiotic questions thrown his way. Thomas, thank you, my friend.